So, I got to see an early screener of Chainsaw Man's new movie, The Reze arc, and it was maybe 1,000 times better than I thought it was going to be, and I had high expectations. To say that this movie is an artistic and technical marvel is somehow an understatement. This movie literally transcends the concept of TV and film and is actually closer to art than basically anything else I've ever watched. And today I want to sit down and give you a spoiler-free review of this movie so you know what to expect when you maybe go to see it in theaters when it comes out October 24th. And at the end of this video, we'll go into a spoiler-filled review, so those of you who don't want spoilers don't have to watch the end of the video. So with no further ado, because I am very excited to talk about it, let's get directly into Chainsaw Man's Reze arc movie reviewed. But before we get to reviewing anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional Nick video every single week, that's 30 additional minutes of my face every week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're on to Kiba versus Naruto. So, the way that we're gonna tackle today's video is exactly the same way that we tackled our review of Demon Slayer's first Infinity Castle movie. That is to say, at first we're gonna talk about the pros and cons of the movie in a non-spoiler context, and then we're gonna talk about the pros and cons of the movie with spoilers attached. Well, let me just tell you right now, before we head into any of these pros and cons, there's a lot more pros than cons. But let's go ahead and get into it here and dive into our non-spoiler pros. The pros for this movie start pretty much from the second the Crunchyroll logo disappears. The opening sequence of this movie sets the tone for how incredibly artsy this entire hour and 45-minute runtime movie is. In fact, the opening sequence of this movie kind of reminds me of the first episode of Uzumaki that HBO put out before they decided to tank the budget for the next 3 episodes. It is haunting and chilling. It's black and white. The music is eerie. And even though what's being said on screen is kind of cute, for some reason you feel as though something is wrong. Now, immediately after this relatively chilling opening sequence, we get something that I didn't expect, which is kind of silly when I look back at it now, because I've been listening to it on TikTok for weeks now. Because after the opening sequence of this movie, we get what is essentially an anime opening. That is to say that we get a new song from the guy who made the opening for season 1 of Chainsaw Man, the song called Kickback, Kenshi Yonezu, with his new Chainsaw Man song, Iris Out. Now, if you've seen any Chainsaw Man content in the last couple of weeks on TikTok, you've probably heard this song. It's like bun dun 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 bun dun dun, and the song is an absolute slapper. I don't know why I always tend to forget that even anime movies get an opening of sorts, but so far as anime openings go, this one's all time. Now, once we're out of the opening sequence and the opening song, and we begin to truly dig into the meat of this movie, we begin to see what makes this movie what I believe to be a modern classic. The slow moments in this movie shine, which is important because there's basically no action in this movie for almost the first 45 or so minutes. But what makes these slow moments, these first 45 or so minutes shine? Well, quite honestly, it's the little things. The entire time you're in this movie, you feel as though you're living inside of the Chainsaw Man universe. The usage of ambient noise, like people talking as they pass the characters in conversation, or cars driving past them on the street. The swapping of POVs from the God's Eye to Denji or Reze, and therefore people's voices changing in volume, and the strategic usage of silence in order to build tension, give this movie genuinely one of the greatest sound designs I've ever seen. And listen, I'm not even trying to be hyperbolic or be over the top as a YouTuber so that you watch the video for longer. This movie is so immersive. In its slow moments, you will forget it is a Chainsaw Man movie. The movie thrusts you into Denji's POV as he falls in love. And honestly, for the majority of the first half of the movie, it more feels like you're living out your own story through Denji's eyes than watching Denji's story. The movie, at least for me, had this almost supernatural ability to evoke nostalgia. At times, I felt like I was watching a movie that comforted me as a child. Like one of the 10 movies that my mom had on VHS, and she would throw a warm blanket over me, and I would watch it as I nodded off on the family couch. The movie feels warm. It feels so human, and that feeling is so beautiful until it begins to get corrupted. See, the beginning of the movie evokes this childlike whimsy, like you're remembering summer romances from when you were 16. But eventually that nostalgia begins to feel wrong. Like you were thinking back on what you remembered as good memories, but realized that you were actually just remembering the good parts of a bad memory. And that, like, it's so hard for me to describe how that is exactly perfect for the tonality of Chainsaw Man. A story about a boy being tricked into situations where he's taken advantage of because he so desperately wants to cling on to the parts of life that he identifies as good. There's this building sense of tension in the movie that builds up almost unnoticeably until it comes to a boil. But along this ride from room temperature to boiling, there are some of the most beautifully well-directed and artistic scenes I've ever seen in anime ever. Even what could be interpreted as the crassest moments from the Reze arc in the manga are delivered in a way that makes them legitimately awe-worthy. So much so that I would say that the first half of this movie is most closely comparable to Studio Ghibli films like Howl's Moving Castle and The Castle in the Sky. It's not like Infinity Castle. It's not like the MHA movies. It's closer to Your Name or Your Lie in April. It's this marvelous artistic feat that draws you into the world that while you're watching it, legitimately the only thought you can have outside of all of the thoughts the director wants you to have is, my God, how did they think of planning each and every single one of these scenes? It is like watching genius at work. Like, for example, and this isn't a spoiler, there's a scene where Denji goes to a festival, but the entire time that Denji is at this festival, the frame rate is choppy. The people around Denji are blurry, and the scene itself is relatively blurry. And while some of you might be saying, oh, that just sounds like terrible animation quality, that's not it. See, the scene is specifically delivered fuzzy and choppy because the director is trying to evoke the feeling of you remembering a good memory from your past. See, when you think about your first kiss or your first slow dance or your first home run in baseball, you don't get some fluid 24 FPS movie playing in your head, or maybe you do, and congratulations if you do. Most people remember a couple of moments from the most important moments in their life. The faces are blurry. You can't remember exactly who was playing second base or who was dancing next to you. You remember the biggest, most important facet of that memory, and that's it. And that's depicted so perfectly in this movie that it doesn't need to be explained. You watch it and you feel as though you're in Denji's mind, way, way off in the future, remembering this night. There are clear-cut directorial choices that are made throughout this movie that not only allow for this movie to be much better than the manga's adaptation of this arc, but also that make you go, how could anybody think to do this? But when this movie does kick into its action gear, like I said, about 45 or so minutes in, it feels more akin to a psychological horror anime a la Paranoia Agent than it does in action shonen manga like Chainsaw Man. The music swaps from heavily classical to heavy metal. The action is unrelenting and gory, and while there is still that patented Chainsaw Man humor, the action is so incredibly relentless that every time you get a good laugh in, it's kind of like just getting a sip of air while being thrown around a raging storm in the middle of the ocean. Because once the action does start, it doesn't stop. See, a lot of people's complaint with Demon Slayer Infinity Castle movie number 1 is that the action is constantly cut up by either Tanjiro talking about how he's gonna figure out this battle or backstories. We get 5 minutes of fight, 40 minutes of backstory, 5 minutes of fight, 40 minutes of backstory, and so on and so forth. That is not the case in Chainsaw Man. Once people start punching, they don't stop punching until there's a victor. And my God, does the action deliver. The second half of this movie is like a mix of the best parts of MHA and JJK. Like if Deku versus Todoroki and Sukuna versus Jogo had a baby. It is bright, fast, sloppy in a good way, creative, technically impressive, and there are anime references all throughout the action sequences, with some of the sequences from the final fight being a direct reference to Luffy's Gear 5th. And that's the cool thing about this movie. It will remind you of the best aspects of all of the best anime on Earth. It is an artistic, directorial, and technical marvel. And with that said, that's all of my pros from the non-spoiler section. So let's get into my non-spoiler cons. Or I should say con, because there's legitimately only one. One of the key relationships that a lot of manga readers hold on to as something that's very, very important to them doesn't necessarily get fleshed out in the way that I, or probably a lot of manga readers, would have anticipated. It seems as though the relationship is more obligatory than romantic. And while there is some shining moments in that specific relationship, and it does become clear, at least by the end of the movie, that these two people do care about each other, it seems as though their relationship is kind of thrown to the wayside for other possibly bigger, more important relationships. And that's it. That is my only complaint. Everything else about the movie is so good, it's redefined to me what good is. Like, you know, somebody who's only ever dated really bad people their entire lives. Apt comparison for Chainsaw Man, actually. But then they finally start dating like a regular, non-abusive person. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know people could be treated this well. Yeah, that's what this movie's gonna do to you. You're gonna be watching it and you're like, oh, I didn't know Didn't know it could make things this cool. There was times I felt legitimately like the people seeing the first motion picture and the train was coming at them and they all ran out of the theater. I was just sitting there gobsmacked, confused as to how this was accomplished. With all that said, let's go ahead and get into our spoiler review of this movie. So if you have not read the Chainsaw Man manga, or you just simply don't want spoilers for the movie, I would stop watching right here. However, if you have read the Chainsaw Man manga and you do know what's gonna happen in this arc, and you're curious about how it was represented in the movie, yeah, this part is for you. I'm gonna give you guys 5 more seconds to leave because I know some of you are not currently touching your phone. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Let's go ahead and get into our pros of this movie, spoilers included. So, the very first scene that we get from this movie is the depiction of Denji's alleyway dream. The recurring dream that Denji is shown having time and time again in part 1 of Chainsaw Man, where he keeps seeing a door and Pochita is telling him under no circumstances, open that door. Now, this is obviously in reference to what Makima does to Power when Power brings Denji a birthday cake. And if you know what this door means for Makima, Power, and Denji, the scene is made especially haunting. See, not only does the movie open with a unique aspect ratio, like the video itself doesn't fill the whole screen, but the sequence is filled with this eerie building music. And it's filmed in black and white, like a Gunji Ito anime. And while the scene depicts a childhood Denji running through an alley and calling out to Pochita because he knows he's in a dream and therefore he gets to pet Pochita, the dichotomy of what Denji wants versus what Pochita is warning him about is so bone-chilling. It's like within the first 30 seconds of the movie, you understand, oh, they put a ton of money into this. And seeing it in a theater where you know 80% of the people you're watching it with don't know the context of this scene, oh my, it's just like hard to describe that feeling. Like as they sit there trying to contemplate what this scene could possibly mean, you realize that that scene means so much more to you, a person who knows what's gonna happen when that door is opened, than to them. Oh, it's such a good start to the movie. Now, pretty immediately after we get the opening sequence and the opening song, Makima asks Denji out on a date, their movie date. And while this is a scene that does happen relatively quick in the manga, I feel as though it actually is a little bit prolonged in the anime. And honestly, I think the way that it's portrayed in the anime is perfect. See, Makima on this date, she's got her hair down, she's wearing street clothes, she seems passive, understandable, even obtainable. And Denji's infatuation with her is so cleverly displayed. Even when he's just looking at her as she's deadpanned watching a movie, his infatuation with her seems almost puppy-like. Here they are out on this date, where hypothetically they should be equals. And yet there's still this unspoken, invisible wall. There's no reason for you to believe that there is still a power dynamic between the two of these two people. They're out on a date, but it's so clear to a viewer. And the movie date itself is actually one of the least artistic parts of the entire movie, and I do genuinely believe that's done intentionally. See, the way that the movie adapts Makima and Denji's movie date scene is done in a very classic manga to anime way. That is to say that it is a pretty one-to-one adaptation. But because of that, this sequence doesn't necessarily evoke anything in us. Yes, Denji's talking about how cute he thinks Makima is, but the music design, the dialogue, and the existence of this invisible barrier between the two of them ensures that what we see in terms of romance between Makima and Denji never reaches the heights of what we see between Reze and Denji. And in actuality, the movie starting with this date between Denji and Makima serves less as a way to flesh out their romantic connection and more as a way to set a watermark for Reze to hurdle over. See, because not only do Denji and Reze have way more time together in this movie, I mean, it's called the Reze arc after all, but they have these sequences together, these sequences that go so far and beyond anything that Denji and Makima ever get. Like, for example, a sequence that could have been adapted in the crassest and crudest possible way. When Reze and Denji get naked at a high school pool in the middle of the night, so Reze can teach Denji how to swim. Now, during this sequence, Denji is talking about how sexy Reze is and how this is his first time seeing nipples, and therefore when you're reading in the manga, you do go, oh, okay, these kids are having fun, they're falling in love, but it is also kind of funny because Denji's kind of funny. And that is absolutely the way that this movie could have adapted the scene, but it isn't at all. The way that this scene is adapted in the movie is one of the most captivating, human, and gorgeous sequences I've ever seen in anything. Regular TV, regular movies, anime, anything. And some of you might be thinking, Nick, that's absurd. It's two 17-year-olds maybe, I don't know exactly how old they are, swimming around in a pool naked. What are you, some kind of gooner? But like, this is one of the most important talking points revolving around Chainsaw Man, because while it might seem like it's a fan service gooner anime, it's not. And this movie proves that point like 1,000 times over. This is gonna sound insane because of how glowingly I talk about season 2 of JJK, but this sequence of Reze teaching Denji how to swim is only comparable in terms of quality and impact to my soul to one of the other greatest sequences ever penned, the aquarium scene from the early parts of JJK season 2. Oh, but Nick, Tatsuki Fujimoto's a gooner, and this is a gooner scene. No, the nudity isn't to sexualize the characters in this scene. It's to establish this cycle of lust and want for appreciation that Denji perpetually finds himself in. It's people smarter and more adapted to human interactions using the thing that Denji thinks he wants against him. During this entire scene, in both the movie and the manga, Denji is in perpetual conflict, talking about how he doesn't want to fall in love with Reze because he wants to keep himself for Makima. But because Reze gets fully nude and beckons him into the water, Denji is unable to reject that advance. And this is a cycle that he finds himself in perpetually. Chainsaw Man is complex and deep. Anyways, after they get out of the water and they dry off and they're hanging out in the school, we get the reveal that Reze is a Soviet Union assassin sent to get Denji's heart. Or at least we get the reveal that Reze is for some reason really good at killing people. As a serial killer that's working with the Typhoon Devil, tries to lure her away from Denji so that he can peel her skin and make Denji kill himself by handing his heart over to it. However, it's not Reze who's cornered, but rather the serial killer, as it's revealed as she swirls around him in a tornado of arms and legs like a young luchador, and as she chokes this man to death while singing a Russian lullaby, that Reze is not who we thought she was. And honestly, this was a shock to the majority of the people in the theater. There is no hints or context to pick up that could possibly allow you to figure out that Reze is an assassin before she reveals her ability to kill a serial killer, and her reveal is dark. It is haunting. While she chokes this man to death, singing him a Russian lullaby, we see that her eyes are wide open, and she's allowing for the raindrops to hit her in the eye without blinking. It begins this festering feeling of discomfort in your chest as you realize, oh no, Reze might have had ulterior motives with Denji. And when we do finally get around to Reze transforming herself into Bomb Girl, her transformation is one of the most stunning pieces of maybe CGI, but I don't think so, animation I've seen in a long while. And after Reze does finally turn herself into the Bomb Devil, like I said in the non-spoiler part of this video, the action is unrelenting. Like the last 45 minutes to an hour of Death Proof, the last 45 minutes to hour of this movie is one long car crash, whose action has a myriad of ridiculously high peaks, my favorite of which being Denji and Beam versus the Typhoon Devil. A fight that doesn't look like it belongs in Chainsaw Man. It looks like it belongs on Egghead Island, as the fight features Denji as Chainsaw Man using his chains to drive a gigantic four-legged shark while laughing his ass off and bouncing off debris in the center of a tornado. The fight itself is completely disorienting and almost impossible to follow, but that's how it should be. It's taking place in the center of a tornado. See, there are a lot of scenes in this movie that if you go into this movie looking for things to hate, you will find things to hate. But every single scene that displays what could be identified as lower quality animation or lower quality direction is done intentionally to great effect. Oh, I could barely see what was happening in the battle against a living tornado. Yeah, that's probably how it should be. We're trying to establish how disorienting this fight is. And while that might just sound like glaze or cope or whatever the kids are calling it now, not until you watch this fight and realize, oh, it's sloppy and hard to follow, but I'm having the time of my life, will you understand why this directorial decision was the right one. And the entire movie obviously comes to a head with the devastating end of the Reze arc. That is to say, Denji waiting with all of the money in his life at the cafe that Reze worked at, hoping that the two of them could run away together. And let me tell you right now, as it's pretty much from this moment on that Makima begins to show her true colors. Makima's reveal as she pops in front of Reze from a towering pile of mice is deeply unsettling, and Reze's death is just as devastating as it should be. But enough with all of this 6-7 glazing cope opium. Let's talk about the spoiler cons from this movie. I kind of already touched on it in the one non-spoiler con I talked about, but that one non-spoiler con that I talked about didn't have details, because if I added details, it would be a spoiler. So let me give you a little bit of context to break down what I was talking about back then. Basically, and listen, this is up to everybody's interpretation, but I believe in this movie, Aki and Angel are kind of tossed to the side. Aki and Angel do get all of their moments and all of their dialogue. They're as present in this interpretation as they are in the manga. However, a lot of their dialogue makes it feel as though they don't like each other all that much. It feels more like they're chained to each other against their will than that they choose to be with each other. Now, we do get the moment when Angel is being sucked into the Typhoon Devil's typhoon, where Aki saves Angel's life by snacking his hand before he can be sucked into the eye of the typhoon, costing Aki 2 months of his life. And then we obviously get the moment where Aki is holding on to Angel as Angel sits between his legs, where he tells Angel that he doesn't want Angel to die because he's sick of people in his life dying. It's cute, it's affectionate, it's romantic. However, unfortunately, this sudden show of affection feels kind of shoehorned in, because for the rest of the movie, Aki and Angel didn't seem like anything more than like work colleagues. So just like kind of out of nowhere, Aki's like, I basically love you to Angel. And so if you're like a big Aki x Angel shipper, unfortunately, this isn't going to be the best movie of all time for you. But listen, there's like 50,000 drawings of the two of them kissing, so I don't know, maybe just peruse those. But yeah, with all of that said, what would I give this movie rating-wise out of 10? Well, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe I gave Demon Slayer Infinity Castle somewhere in the region of a 9.2 or a 9.3, and if that's the case, I'd have to give this movie like a 9.8. Legitimately, the only thing about it is that Aki and Angel's relationship doesn't feel as romantic as I want it to be. Everything else about it, and I mean everything else, every single other second, has redefined to me what I believe perfect should look like in a movie. And while there's going to be a huge conversation about what's better between Demon Slayer Infinity Castle Part 1 and this in terms of anime movies that came out this year, these two movies aren't playing the same game. That's not saying that Chainsaw Man's so far out of Demon Slayer's league that they're playing different sports. The things that made the Demon Slayer Infinity Castle movie incredible don't exist in the Chainsaw Man movie, and vice versa. The scale, backstories, and ridiculously technical application of CGI and high-level animation is what makes Demon Slayer Infinity Castle Part 1 a low 9 out of 10. But if Demon Slayer Infinity Castle Part 1 is something like Avengers Doomsday or Infinity War, a movie where a bunch of different people are fighting a bunch of different really important and really cool looking battles, then Chainsaw Man's like one battle after another. A directorial, artistic, ridiculously well acted masterpiece that feels as though it exists in a genre of its own and therefore is genre defying. Chainsaw Man's Reze arc movie accomplishes something I've rarely ever seen from pieces of art, while Demon Slayer Infinity Castle feels like the highest level application of well-known art. There's no reason to compare these two movies because they're incomparable. It would be like comparing the surrealism of Salvador Dali to the marble statue work of Michelangelo. One is not better than the other. Now, if you put a gun to my head and said we have to delete one of these movies from your memories, I would choose Demon Slayer to be deleted. But that could also just be because I like Chainsaw Man more than I like Demon Slayer. All that is to say, do yourself a favor and see this movie in theaters if you can. And if you can, and this is gonna sound like I'm shilling out for big companies here, but watch it through official forums. Watch it on Crunchyroll or Hulu or Netflix or wherever it's gonna end up. Probably Crunchyroll. I'm all for pirating things that deserve to be pirated, but this isn't one of those things. This movie is art, and the people who made it deserve to get official feedback that it was good. And they do that by checking the ticket sales or watch time on regular, regulated watch websites. And considering the fact that Chainsaw Man almost did not get this movie because the first season did not perform that well in terms of Blu-ray sales in Japan, I don't want to see that situation replicated. So like I said, watch this movie in whatever official capacity you can, because it deserves it. With all that said, if you guys have seen the movie, what did you think about it? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I watched it in sub. I'm gonna go back to the theaters and watch it in dub the second that I get the chance.